Hello, and thanks for watching this short video on how to create a forest recovery project using Disaster Recovery Edition in Recovery Manager for Active Directory DRE. My name is Brian Heimer. I'm a solutions architect with Quest. Now you'll notice here in my standard console, I've created some computer collections. Before you can ever create a forest recovery project, you need to have backups. And so I've created collections to create both system state backups and Windows Server backups. That's what these symbols are at the end of each of my domain names. I do this either by clicking on this backup system state wizard, or maybe the easier way is to right click and say create collection. And then when it creates a collection, you can get all the properties. Let's just quickly look at the difference between these. So there's a system state backup, and here is a Windows Server backup properties. Let me just go ahead and get where we can see both of those side by side. On the system state backup, you'll notice I don't have this create bare metal recovery backup checked, but I do have it checked over here. And if I look at my console storage, here's where I've decided where I'm going to store my backup, how many generations I keep. And you'll notice there's some other tabs here, the DC storage, the components tab, the advanced tab, and there's more as well, but I'm not going to get into all the details here. We'll just go ahead and leave it at that. On the Windows Server backup side, I have checked this box. The first thing I want you to notice is the console storage tab is now grayed out. You cannot enter console storage. The components tab as well is grayed out, and the advanced tab is grayed out. But the DC storage tab is available. Now, the reason for that is when the backup is made, it's created by an agent running on the DC. From there, the DC storage tab allows it to copy to a location. But you'll notice I'm not storing it on the DC itself. I'm using a UNC. And you'll also notice that I'm not using a host name on that UNC. That's because I use Active Directory Integrated DNS. And if I used a host name and Active Directory was down, I couldn't resolve that host name. So instead, I'm using an IP address. And I'm also deciding how many copies I keep. Now that we've looked at those, let me close those out and bring up this window again. You'll notice I've run these computer collections. That's why each one of them has that little green checkbox next to it. And if I come down here to my Active Directory backups, you can see my backups are all listed in here. Some of these are full backups. Those are rather large. There's also a system state backup for each of one of these machines, and those are actually smaller and compressed. So they're about 60% compression is what we get on average. So I've got backups. Let's launch the Forest Recovery console. Now I can do that one of two ways. I can either go to the Start menu, and I can just launch it from here, or on the standard console, I can slide down here to the bottom, and there's a Start Forest Recovery console link as well. When you first start the Forest Recovery console and you don't have a project, it'll immediately ask you to create one. And you can pick select a backup. If you don't get this, if you had another project show up, you can simply cancel out of it and hit file new project if you want. Both things will do the very same thing. It'll get you to the backups that are there. For my system state backup, I think I'll just use Acme DC1. So I'll go ahead and click next. This will take a few moments to extract. And there we can see the forest is listed out, all of the domains of the forest. And if I wanted to build a single domain recovery, here's where I would select which domain I want. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do a full forest, so I'll click next. Now I need to create a project file, and I think I'll create one just called test, BMR, and IFM. So that's bare metal recovery and install from media recovery. You need to give your project a password. The password is used to encrypt credentials over here on the left for each one of the servers. So I'm just going to give the number 1 because this is just a lab, but you might want to use something a little more complex as a seed for your encryption. Once I finish that, I'll get all my DCs listed up here, and you'll notice they all have exclamation points. And that's because a lot of the credentials are not put in yet. If I highlight a DC and I can see the settings for it down below, a lot of that's just not there yet. I'm going to change these to the method I want to restore first. So I'm going to take these top 3 and change them from just a restore of Active Directory system state to a bare metal Active Directory recovery. And then these last 3, I'm going to change them to an install from media recovery. So there we are, install Active Directory from media. You'll notice that a lot of the fields are still blank. If I highlight one of these, it still shows me where I need to put things in. But you'll also notice there's this checkbox that says use default domain access credentials. I want to take advantage of that. So I can either click the view button here, or I can go up here to tools and go to recovery project settings. And here's my domains. If I highlight a domain, I'm able to enter the credentials for that domain. Now, in my environment, all of those credentials are actually stored in this lab environment in a password holder. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and just go ahead and enter these by hitting insert. So there I've taken care of Acme Lab. I'll apply that, go to Poodle, do the same thing. And then I'll apply that and go to Aussie and do the same thing. And now all of my credentials are entered in the project, but not for each domain controller. So now if I highlight all my domain controllers and check that box, I've checked it for each one of them, and now those credentials are in. You'll notice still that there's credentials I need to enter here. And I not only want to do a bare metal backup restore, I want to follow that with the latest system state restore. So I'm going to check this box as well. And then I'll highlight, I should highlight all of these first. Check that box. And now I can go ahead and enter those credentials for all three of these DCs as well. Here, I'm going to use a local credential. App Server is the machine that has my bare metal backups and my system state backups. And so I'm going to put that in as my credentials. And again, I'm using the same password. It's just a lab. I'm sure you guys are doing a little bit different than that in the real world. At least I hope so. So I have those credentials entered as well. Down here on these three machines, I'm going to need to enter those same credentials, but I have others I need to do. Up here, we can enter that password. And then for each one of these, I need to specify the Windows server that is going to take the place of the domain controller. And I specify that target computer by IP address. I'll just highlight each one of these and do them individually. And here's the first one. So this computer is 10.1.2.10. And for me, this is actually the IP address of the domain controller. If you were in an actual scenario, it might not be the same IP address. Now, because these are the same machines, we're going to run into an error when we do our verify settings. You'll notice those yellow check marks are gone as I finished filling out each field. And now I think we're pretty close to set. There's one other thing I wanted to do, and that's the global catalog settings. I like to keep my global catalog intact. And the reason I do is because in Active Directory, when you're doing a forest recovery, global catalogs can be the longest part of your recovery process. Microsoft recommends that you don't keep your GC intact, that you actually rebuild your global catalogs. But they do that because they don't know anything about the backups you're going to use. They could be days skewed, or maybe even weeks skewed. But with Recovery Manager, you get tight control over your backups. And we actually even notify you if the backups that you selected for your recovery are skewed by more than 24 hours. If you don't get a notification, it's pretty safe to keep your global catalogs intact, and you'll save a lot of time in your recovery process. Okay, so that's all saved. I'm going to go ahead and save the project. And let's go ahead and run a verify settings and see how we did. Now I can highlight each of these DCs and see the steps that they're going through in the verify settings. Remember, I did say that the install Active Directory from media boxes would get a failure, and that's because they are actually running as a domain controller. So I'm not just running a standard Windows server here, which is what I'd use during recovery. So they're going to fail. These guys are going to get a warning message, so you can see they turned yellow, and that's because these are actually domain controllers that are still running as well, and I'm not really ready to do a recovery. They noticed that they connected to the Forest Recovery Agent instead of the Bare Metal Recovery Agent on a Windows RE box. So this is about as far as you can get with verify settings unless your forest is actually being recovered. And that's what I had to show for today. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a great day.
To learn more about Recovery Manager, visit us online.